Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Welcome to episode 75 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll either be read in the podcast or the column anonymously, and you're free to decide which one you would like your letter to be read in. Lord, if you want to read the columns and listen to the podcast, you can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com, subscribe to our newsletter by going to go.nonmonogamyhelp.com/email, or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at nonmonogamyhelp. If you want to support the columns and the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you became a patron on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix. It really helps me. Even $1 a month or £1 a month or one of whatever currency per month, if that's a useful measurement. It might not be in some currencies. Anyway, the point is it's super helpful, and if you could donate $5 or more a month, your name with your permission will be read at the end of the podcast. Let's get to this week's discussion question. If this is the first episode you're hearing, every week before I read the letter, I put forth a discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, or anyone else to get to know them a little bit more. I also answer it myself briefly to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is: talk about one hard limit you have and how it became a hard limit for you. I'm pretty sure I've probably told this story or a similar story on the podcast or written in the column before, but a pretty big hard limit that I have is sort of a forced friendship or forced type of what's called kitchen table polyamory. And if you're unfamiliar with what kitchen table polyamory is, basically it's sort of like the idea that like all of your partners and your everyone will get along and sit together at the kitchen table, yada yada, so forth. I don't have a problem with that being an ideal that people would want, and I could see why, but I feel like the sort of expectation that I'm going to get along with people who also date my partner is really heavy on me, and I don't really like that, because I guess I don't really enjoy relationships that feel forced, like I have no other choice but to like them. So it's kind of a hard limit for me to date someone or be with someone who kind of insists on having this, or that this is an absolute thing that has to happen, just because it would make me feel really uncomfortable to have that type of pressure on me. And then I think another hard limit would be, I don't necessarily have to meet my partner's partners or anything like that, but I have been in situations where I was basically used for someone to cheat, even though everyone in the situation involved was polyamorous, and I don't really know why. So I kind of have the feeling of, I don't have to meet them, but if you're kind of cagey about it, then that's a hard limit for me. I don't know if I could deal with a person who is in a don't ask, don't tell situation, just because I've had that not so greatly used against me. And it wasn't even a don't ask, don't tell situation. So yeah, I don't think I would be able to agree to that, just because it would remind me of some not so great situations. So yeah, that's my answer, and I'll repeat the discussion question. Talk about one hard limit you have and how it became a hard limit for you. Let's get to this week's letter. I've been practicing polyamory for about 5 years, and things have always gone pretty well. However, I now find myself in a really tough situation. I've been with my partner L for 3 years and partner E for 2 months. Things were going great. Me and E are great at bluntly communicating, share a lot of interests, and spend so much time together that E and L have become super close too. L wants to date E, and I'm rooting for it, but E only wants to be friends with her right now. Totally fine. But just over the past week, E has started to be really mean. I ask what's wrong, and they snap at me. In their defense, they just got out of an emotionally abusive relationship and are still in contact with said abuser, so I recognize that a lot of him may have rubbed off on them. I point out when they say things that hurt me, often a blatant insult brushed off with a "I was teasing, LOL," but they still do it again and again. I've started to recognize that when I'm around them, I feel worse, and there's just so much negativity that I don't want to be around. I want to break up with them, but I don't want to ruin Elle's chances with them, since the two of them are still best friends. I've mentioned it before to Elle, and she thinks I'm overreacting and should give them more of a chance. How can I break up with E while still preserving my relationship with Elle, and making it clear that I'm okay with them still hanging out if they want to? Before we get to this week's answer, I'm going to quickly plug this episode's sponsor, BetterHelp. Quite often in a lot of my columns and podcasts, I encourage people to seek a polyamory-friendly therapist, and for a lot of people, finding a therapist locally who knows about polyamory or may be supportive or may be able to help at all may be impossible or out of your budget. BetterHelp allows you to find therapists online that you can send messages to at any time of day, and they do offer some financial aid. You can get 10% off your first month by using promo code Non-Monogamy Help at checkout or going to betterhelp.com/non-monogamy help. Let's get to this week's answer. The biggest issue for me here is downplaying your feelings by both of your partners, actually. Not just E, but also L. I feel like it's an understandable, somewhat defensive reaction if you say, oh, this hurt me, and someone's like, it was a joke, I'm just teasing, and we do sometimes tease people, and it does come off the wrong way, and we don't necessarily mean it, but that doesn't mean that you can't apologize, and it doesn't necessarily mean you can't try to do better, and maybe realize that whatever kind of sense of humor you have isn't really working with the other person. And it's not fun to be the person who has to kind of constantly say, this hurts my feelings. I just feel like, firstly, E saying that, oh, I'm just teasing, LOL, and they keep doing it. And then L also saying that you're overreacting. I feel like that's not necessarily a great thing either. Now, if L feels like, there's totally a situation that could happen where E maybe has a particular sense of humor, and I'm not saying that's what happens here because it does sound like E is stressed, but let's say E has a particular style of humor that you don't really like, and that does hurt your feelings, and maybe L shares that same type of sense of humor. That is fine. I don't think everybody has to have the same sense of humor. I don't think everybody has to do things in exactly the same way, but I do think that if you say, I don't care, this is your sense of humor, it bothers me, I don't like it, that's also okay, and it doesn't have to be that anyone in the room is evil or too sensitive. It can just be that you have a different style of how you want to be spoken to. I do kind of wonder, because you're saying that E snapped at you, that this is not actually a joke, but I'm entertaining that idea for the sake of the excuse. And there's lots of situations like that. There are sensitive subjects that people have, and they have a right to be sensitive about it. If your grandma just passed away and somebody told a joke about a grandma passing away, you probably wouldn't think it was necessarily funny at the time. And maybe they like that type of edgy humor. And maybe if you hadn't experienced that, you might feel differently. We can all kind of respect that. So what I'm trying to say is that excuse still doesn't really fly, because if they were teasing, fine. But you're still allowed to say, you know what, you can tease L that way, and that's fine if L is okay with that, but I don't want you to do that with me. That's fine. So it's not really an excuse that flies. And L sort of saying you're overreacting is also not cool. L may have a relationship with E where they do this type of stuff if we're wanting to entertain the idea that it's a joke. They can do that together, but you don't want to do that, and that's fine. So I would kind of take it as they're saying they're teasing, okay, fine, and just go with that, even though you're saying that E is snapping at you and it doesn't sound like teasing to me. For the sake of argument, I would go ahead with the teasing thing and say, okay, but I don't like that, and you need to stop that. The second thing that I would say as well is that you can't ruin a relationship with someone else's relationship that you're not even part of. I feel like even within monogamy, we get a little bit hung up on, I don't know, I feel like it's sort of the same thing of like, oh, I don't want to, tell someone that I'm attracted to them because it will ruin our friendship. And I think, depending on how that pass is made, I feel like if they make a pass that's like violates boundaries, then yeah, that might be the thing that ruins the friendship, but not necessarily the interest. You know what I'm saying? So you not wanting to be with E anymore doesn't necessarily have anything to do with L's relationship with E. And I feel like if L will assume that you're judging them, then that's the thing that you can address. But if L is going to kind of decide not to date E because of you, then that's kind of L's decision. L is responsible for L's own relationships, not you. And it's not your relationship to manage, either by quote unquote ruining it or quote unquote endorsing it. It's their relationship. And if E is the type of person that is going to not date L because of you, then that's not something. What are you going to do? Stay with E? That's a hostage situation. So I don't think you should think of it in terms of, I don't want to ruin L's chances with them. I think that you need to do what feels right for you. Break up if you want to break up. And whatever happens between E and L, you can perfectly say, like, look, I don't want to date E anymore. And I'm very clear that if you would like to date E, then that's fine. I don't mind if you hang out, but it's just not something that I want to do anymore. Recognize that if you have a shared space together, or if you hang out together, or if L wants to bring E over, that might be super awkward. It's going to be awkward for a while, and maybe there's a way that you can manage that. But you aren't responsible for other people's relationships. They're responsible for their own relationship, unless you're actively trying to sabotage somebody else's relationship, in which case there are bigger problems. You just deciding that you don't want to date E is not ruining anything for L. And think about it the other way. Like, what's the only option? That you stay with E just so that L can be fine dating E? I just feel like that's a hostage situation. That's not a relationship. So I do think that you need to break up if you want to break up. Have a discussion with L. Make it clear that, this is how I feel. I don't really want to have this relationship anymore, but I'm perfectly fine if you would like to date E. I'm fine with that. And let it be what it is. If L is kind of somewhat immature, L might decide that they don't want to be with you anymore because of it, especially given the comments already, like, overreacting. It doesn't really spell out the greatest things, but that's not either something you can control either. And you shouldn't also be in a relationship with E because L can't deal with it. Like, that's also a hostage situation regardless. So yeah, I think you should break up if you want to break up. I think the biggest thing also as well, boundaries that you need to make really clear, not just with E, but with L as well. It's not cool for L to tell you that you're overreacting. It's okay for L to have different sensitivities than you. It's okay for L to have different capacities for dealing with somebody else's kind of emotional turbulence. That's absolutely fine. L may be able to deal with some of the snapping in a way that you can't. And, it may be that E is going through something, and that's why they have started to suddenly become mean. But you don't have to deal with it. And just because L is okay with dealing with it doesn't make you overreacting or more sensitive or wrong. So I think that in the future, you need to kind of make it clear, like, look, L, it's okay if you feel comfortable with this type of behavior, but I don't also have to feel comfortable with it just because you do. And I don't appreciate that you told me that I'm overreacting. And I wish that you would, if you feel like you're in a position where you feel like you can give E more of a chance, that's fine. I don't personally feel that. So I would really appreciate if you didn't kind of downplay my feelings in this way, because I do kind of feel like it's a bit of a downplay. It's a bit of like, oh, you need to just get over it, and that really isn't going to fix the situation. If L has some tips for how they manage to deal with some of this stuff and not take it personally, then that's fine. There is another perhaps alternate universe where E snaps at you and you don't necessarily feel as bad about it because you don't take it as personally and you kind of ignore it, and eventually E, but I don't know, that I guess could exist in an alternate universe, but I feel like that's not you right now. And it's fine if someone snaps at you for you to be like, you know what, I don't want to put up with this anymore. You don't have to put up with people's stuff. And L may be able to manage it, but that's L's life and L's decision. So yeah, to sum up, it's not good when people downplay or ignore your feelings or dismiss them in such a way. Maybe L felt like, she was being a little bit helpful when she said that, but I don't think that that was necessarily helpful for you, and it's okay for you to say so. You can't ruin a relationship for somebody else in this way unless you're actively trying to discourage it or sabotage it in some way. You breaking up with E is not ruining a relationship between L and E. That is something for them to negotiate. Adults are responsible for their own relationships. This is not your relationship to manage. And I do think that you should break up if you want to break up. And just make it really clear. Just say overtly to L, like, look, if you want to date E and still be friends, I'm fine with that. And L just has to trust that that's what you mean. And if L doesn't trust it, that's what you mean, then there are bigger problems. So yeah, I hope that helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 75 of Non-Monogamy Help. If you want to be awesome, you can donate to our Patreon. My Patreon. Donating $5 or more means your name with your permission will be read at the end of the podcast. This week's current patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury-Jones, Juke Ellen Robertson, Nikki Jones, and James Wartell. If you can't become a patron, because I know not everybody has the extra cash, then if you can take 5 minutes, log into iTunes, find the podcast, rate and review it, that would be very, very helpful to me. And apparently also you can rate podcasts on Spotify now, although I've looked and I've tried and I don't see anywhere to rate them. But if you have this mystical, magical Spotify rating thing, then also do that. That would be super helpful. You can leave a review if you want, but if you just want to do a rating, still also really appreciated. That's all for this week. You will get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight. Thank you again for listening. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our music has been provided by Chris Albury-Jones at albury-jones.com, and our podcast art was made by Dom Young at domdung.com. Thank you again for listening.